Sometimes the most terrifying encounters come when we are completely alone, and sometimes they force us to face truths we have refused to see our entire lives. Joseph Novak is an old janitor who has cared for an abandoned building in the old town for 30 years. Every evening he locks the doors and returns home. Nothing more, nothing less. Until one night, the telephone rings. The elevator has stopped between floors. Someone is trapped inside. Joseph takes his tools and heads into the darkness. But what he finds behind those doors is not just a person who needs help. It is someone from his past, someone who cannot possibly be there, because that person died 20 years ago. What happened that night in that building, and why is it returning now? Before we return to the story, tell us in the comments if you believe in ghosts, and if this mysterious puzzle has captured your interest. Please subscribe, because tomorrow I have prepared something extraordinarily special for you. Sometimes the most terrifying encounters come when we are completely alone, and sometimes they force us to face truths we have refused to see our entire lives. Joseph Novak is an old janitor who has cared for an abandoned building in the old town for 30 years. Every evening, he locks the doors and returns home. Nothing more, nothing less. Until one night, the telephone rings. The elevator has stopped between floors. Someone is trapped inside. Joseph takes his tools and heads into the darkness. But what he finds behind those doors is not just a person who needs help. It is someone from his past, someone who cannot possibly be there, because that person died 20 years ago. What happened that night in that building, and why is it returning now? Before we return to the story, tell us in the comments if you believe in ghosts, and if this mysterious puzzle has captured your interest. Please subscribe, because tomorrow I have prepared something extraordinarily special for you. The old Mrazek building stood at the corner of Lidova Street and Dvorakova Avenue, like a tombstone marking the death of better times. 7 stories of grey concrete and dusty windows that had not seen a proper cleaning in decades. Most people in town walked past it without a second glance, their eyes sliding over its facade the way you might look past a homeless man on a street corner. It was simply there, part of the landscape, unremarkable and forgettable. But Joseph Novak knew every inch of that building. He had worked there for 30 years, first as a maintenance man, when the place still hummed with life, and then as the lone caretaker, after everyone else had gone. He was 68 years old now, his back bent from decades of mopping floors and carrying buckets, his hands rough and scarred from countless repairs. His hair had gone completely white 5 years ago, and his face carried the deep lines of a man who had seen more than his share of hardship. But his eyes were still sharp, still alert, and they held a sadness that never quite went away. Joseph lived alone in a small apartment 3 blocks from the Mrazek building. His wife Anna had died 12 years ago, taken by cancer that spread through her body like fire through dry grass. They had never had children. Anna could not conceive, and after years of trying and failing, they had made peace with it. "Just the 2 of us," she used to say, "and that is enough." And it had been enough, until she was gone. After her death, Joseph threw himself into his work with a desperation that bordered on obsession. The building became his entire world, his reason to wake up each morning. He knew every creaking floorboard, every loose tile, every place where the roof leaked when it rained. He knew which radiators clanged in the winter and which windows stuck in their frames. The building was old and tired, just like him, and he felt a kinship with it that he could not quite explain. The Mrazek building had once been the headquarters of a textile company that employed over 200 people. In its prime, the lobby had gleamed with polished marble floors and brass fixtures. Secretaries had clicked across those floors in high heels, their arms full of folders and papers. Executives had strode through the hallways with purpose and confidence. The elevators had carried workers up and down all day long, their motors humming steadily. But that was a lifetime ago. The textile company had gone bankrupt in 1994, crushed by foreign competition and bad management. The building had sat empty for a year, then briefly housed a law firm that lasted only 18 months before moving to a more modern location. After that, a succession of small businesses had tried and failed to make use of the space. By 2005, the building was essentially abandoned. The owner, an investment company in Prague, kept Joseph on the payroll to maintain basic security and prevent the place from falling into complete ruin. They paid him just enough to keep him there, nothing more. Joseph arrived at the building every evening at 6 o'clock. He would unlock the heavy front doors with a key that must have weighed half a pound, step into the lobby, and begin his nightly routine. First, he would walk through each floor, checking that all the windows were closed and locked. Then he would inspect the bathrooms for leaks or other problems. After that, he would sweep the lobby and the main hallways, even though barely anyone ever walked through them anymore. Finally, he would return to the small office on the ground floor that served as his headquarters, where he would sit and read the newspaper or listen to the radio until 10 o'clock. At 10, he would make one final round, lock the front doors from the inside, and then leave through the back entrance, securing it behind him. The routine never varied. It was predictable and safe, and Joseph needed that predictability more than he cared to admit. But there were things about the building that troubled him, things he tried not to think about too much. Sometimes when he walked through the upper floors, he would hear sounds that had no explanation. Footsteps in empty hallways, doors closing when no one was there. A voice, distant and unclear, calling out words he could not quite make out. He told himself it was just the building settling, old pipes expanding and contracting, wind rattling loose window frames. Old buildings made noises. That was normal. But deep down, in a place he did not like to visit, Joseph knew the truth. The building was not just old. It was haunted by something, by memories maybe, or by events that had left a mark that time could not erase. 20 years ago, something terrible had happened in the Mrazek building. Joseph had been there. He had seen it. And even though he had tried for 2 decades to forget, the memory lived in him like a splinter buried too deep to remove. It was 1999, a cold February evening. Joseph had been working late, repairing a broken heater on the 4th floor. Most of the building was empty by then, just a few small offices still clinging to life. He had been alone, or so he thought. He had heard a sound, a crash, coming from somewhere above him. He had climbed the stairs to the 6th floor and found the door to the stairwell leading to the roof standing open. Snow had been blowing in, covering the steps. He had climbed to the roof and seen a figure standing at the edge, silhouetted against the grey winter sky. Before he could call out, before he could move, the figure had stepped forward and disappeared. Joseph had run to the edge and looked down. 7 stories below, A body lay on the pavement, broken and still. It was a young man named Tomas Svoboda, 26 years old, who had worked as an accountant for one of the last remaining companies in the building. The police had ruled it a suicide. Thomas had been struggling with depression, they said. He had left a note in his apartment. Case closed. But Joseph had never believed it was that simple. He had seen Thomas earlier that evening, had exchanged a few words with him in the lobby. The young man had seemed tense, worried but not suicidal. And there were other details that bothered Joseph, small things that did not add up. The door to the roof was always locked. He kept the only key on his keyring. So how had Thomas gotten up there? And why had Joseph heard what sounded like 2 sets of footsteps on the roof that night, not just one? He had mentioned these concerns to the police, but they had dismissed them. People in distress do strange things, they told him. Maybe Thomas had picked the lock. Maybe Joseph had been mistaken about the footsteps. The case was closed. Let it go. So Joseph had tried to let it go. He had buried his doubts and continued his work. But the memory of that night haunted him. Sometimes when he walked past the spot where Thomas had landed, he would feel a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. And sometimes, late at night when the building was quiet, he would hear sounds from the 6th floor. Footsteps, a door opening, the wind from the roof stairwell. It was as if the building itself remembered what had happened, as if it was trying to tell him something. The years had passed slowly. Joseph had grown older, more tend, more resigned to his solitary existence. His few friends had drifted away or died. His brother, his only remaining family, had moved to Germany, and they spoke perhaps twice a year. Joseph's world had shrunk to the boundaries of the Mrazek building and his small apartment. He woke, he worked, he slept. That was all. And he had made peace with it, or at least he thought he had. Until the night the telephone rang. It was a Wednesday in late October, the kind of evening when darkness falls early, and the air carries a damp chill that seeps into your bones. Joseph had arrived at 6 o'clock as always, and begun his routine. The building felt different that night, though he could not say exactly how. The air seemed heavier somehow, pressing down on him. The usual sounds seemed muffled, as if the building was holding its breath. He tried to shake off the feeling as he walked through the floors, but it clung to him like smoke. By 8 o'clock, he had finished his rounds and returned to his office. He made himself a cup of tea on the small electric kettle he kept there and settled into his chair with the newspaper. Outside, rain had begun to fall, tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. At 8:37, the telephone on his desk rang. The sound was so sudden and unexpected that Joseph actually jumped, sloshing tea onto his newspaper. The phone almost never rang. The investment company in Prague contacted him perhaps once every few months, always during business hours, never in the evening. He stared at the old black telephone as it rang a second time, a third. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the receiver and held it to his ear. "Hello," he said, his voice rough. There was silence on the other end, just the faint hiss of an open line. Then a voice spoke, so quiet he could barely hear it. "The elevator," the voice said. It was a man's voice, young, strained. "The elevator is stuck. I am trapped. Please help me." Joseph felt his heart begin to pound. The elevator had not been used in years. It had been shut down for safety reasons, the power disconnected. No one should be in it. No one could be in it. "Who is this?" Joseph asked. "Where are you calling from?" But the line had gone dead, leaving only silence and the sound of his own ragged breathing. Joseph sat frozen in his chair, the telephone receiver still pressed against his ear, listening to the empty silence on the other end of the line. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. "The elevator is stuck. I am trapped. Please help me." The words echoed in his head, spoken in that young, frightened voice. But it was impossible, Hanul. The elevator had been shut down for over 5 years. The power had been disconnected by an electrician from the city, the doors on every floor locked with metal bars he had installed himself. No one could be inside. No one should even be able to call from inside. The elevator had no phone, had never had a phone. So who had called him, and from where? He slowly placed the receiver back on its cradle and stared at the telephone as if it might offer some explanation. Rain continued to drum against the window behind him. The office suddenly felt very cold, despite the small heater glowing in the corner. Joseph rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them, trying to calm the trembling that had started in his fingers and was spreading through his whole body. He was 68 years old. He had seen many strange things in his life, had lived through hard times and loss. He was not a man who frightened easily. But something about that phone call had reached into a deep part of him, touching old fears he thought he had buried long ago. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, and walked to the small window that looked out onto the lobby. From here he could see the elevator doors, 2 panels of brushed steel that reflected the dim light from the single bulb that stayed on all night. The metal bars he had installed were still in place, locked tight. Nothing had been disturbed. Everything looked exactly as it always did. Maybe it had been a prank, he thought. Maybe some kid had gotten his number somehow and decided to play a cruel joke. But even as he tried to convince himself, he knew it made no sense. How would anyone have this number? It was not listed anywhere. Only the investment company in Prague had it, and they would never give it out. Joseph made a decision. He would check the elevator, just to be sure. He would go up to each floor and verify that the doors were still secured, that no one had tampered with them. It would take 20 minutes, maybe 30. Then he could put this foolishness out of his mind and finish his shift in peace. He picked up his flashlight from the desk, a heavy black metal cylinder that he had owned for 20 years, and walked out of the office into the lobby. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor, loud in the silence. The building felt different now, watchful somehow, as if it was aware of his presence in a way it usually was not. He started on the ground floor, examining the elevator doors carefully. The metal bars were in place, secured with padlocks that showed no signs of tampering. He shone his flashlight through the narrow gap between the doors and saw only darkness, no movement, no sound. He moved to the stairs and began climbing, his knees aching with each step. The second floor was the same. Doors secured, nothing disturbed. The third floor, the same. But as he climbed higher, the feeling of wrongness grew stronger. The air seemed to thicken around him. His breathing became labored, and not just from the exertion of climbing stairs. On the 4th floor, he stopped and listened. Somewhere above him, he heard a sound. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. A humming, mechanical and steady. His heart began to pound harder. He knew that sound. It was the sound of the elevator motor running. But that was impossible. The power was disconnected. He climbed faster now, driven by a growing sense of urgency he could not explain. 5th floor, doors still secured. The humming was louder now. 6th floor, the floor where Thomas Svoboda had worked, where Joseph had last seen him alive. The elevator doors here were also secured, but the humming was very loud now, vibrating through the walls. Joseph pressed his ear against the cold steel of the elevator doors and listened. The motor was definitely running, the cables moving. Something was inside the shaft, moving between floors. He could hear it clearly now. And then, beneath the mechanical sounds, he heard something else. Breathing. Someone was breathing on the other side of those doors, slow and steady. "Joseph," a voice whispered. The sound of his own name, spoken in that enclosed space, made him jerk back from the doors as if they had burned him. "Joseph, please. Help me." It was the same voice from the telephone, but clearer now, more distinct. And with a cold shock that made his vision swim, Joseph recognized it. He knew that voice. He had heard it 20 years ago, on a cold February evening, speaking those last casual words in the lobby, before climbing the stairs for the final time. It was Thomas Svoboda's voice. Joseph staggered backward, his flashlight falling from his numb fingers and clattering across the floor. This was not possible. Thomas was dead. He had been dead for 20 years. Joseph had seen his broken body on the pavement below. He had attended the funeral. He had watched them lower the coffin into the ground. Dead men did not speak. Dead men did not call on telephones and ask for help. This had to be some kind of hallucination, a trick of his aging mind. Maybe he was having a stroke. Maybe he had fallen asleep at his desk, and this was all a nightmare. But the voice came again, muffled by the steel doors but unmistakable. "Joseph, I know you are there. I can hear you. Please, you have to let me out. I have been trapped here for so long. So very long." The desperation in those words was real, palpable. Joseph felt it like a physical pressure against his chest. His rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that he should run, get out of the building, call someone. But another part of him, a deeper part, knew that he could not leave. Whatever was happening here, whatever impossible thing was unfolding, it was connected to him. It had been waiting for him. For 20 years it had been waiting, and now it had finally reached out. He picked up his flashlight with shaking hands and shone it on the metal bars securing the elevator doors. He would have to remove them. He would have to open those doors and see what was inside. Every instinct he possessed told him this was madness, that he should not do this. But he had to know. After 20 years of questions, of doubts, of guilt that had eaten at him in the quiet hours of the night, he had to know the truth. His hands moved almost of their own accord, pulling the key ring from his belt, finding the small key that opened the padlocks. The locks clicked open, sounding impossibly loud. He removed the metal bars and let them clatter to the floor. Now only the elevator doors themselves stood between him and whatever waited inside. There was no power to open them automatically, so he would have to pry them apart manually. He had done this before, years ago during maintenance work. There was a technique to it. He wedged his fingers into the small gap between the doors and pulled. The doors resisted at first, then slowly, grudgingly, began to separate. The humming of the motor grew louder as the gap widened. 6 inches, 12 inches, 18. And then Joseph saw what was inside the shaft. The elevator car was there, suspended between the 6th and 7th floors, its roof just below floor level. Light spilled from inside it, warm and yellow, completely impossible because there was no power connected. And standing inside the car, looking up at him through the opening, was a young man. He was perhaps 26 or 27 years old, wearing a white shirt and dark tie, his hair neatly combed, his face pale and drawn. It was Thomas Svoboda, looking exactly as he had looked on that February night 20 years ago. Not a day older, not a day different. Their eyes met across the impossible distance, and Joseph felt something inside him break. Some wall he had built to protect himself from the truth he had always known, but never admitted. Thomas smiled, a sad, tired smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for coming. We need to talk, Joseph. There are things you need to understand. Things about that night. Things about what really happened to me." The elevator began to rise slowly, bringing Thomas level with the floor. And Joseph knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason or logic, that his life would never be the same again. For a long moment, Joseph could not move, could not speak, could not do anything but stare at the impossible figure standing in the elevator car before him. His brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. This was Thomas Svoboda, or something wearing his face, his body, his clothes. The young man looked solid and real, not transparent or ghostly like the spirits in old stories. He cast a shadow on the floor of the elevator. Joseph could see the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. But none of this changed the fundamental impossibility of the situation. Thomas Svoboda was dead. He had been dead for 20 years. "Joseph," Thomas said gently, his voice carrying that same quality it had possessed in life, soft and educated and careful. "I know this is difficult to understand. I know what you are thinking. You saw me fall. You saw my body. You went to my funeral. All of that is true. But please, listen to me. There are things about that night you do not know. Things I need to tell you before it is too late." Joseph found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You are not real. You cannot be real. This is not happening." Thomas smiled sadly and shook his head. "I am as real as you are. I am here, and I have been here all along, trapped in this building, in this elevator, unable to move forward, unable to rest. 20 years I have been here, Joseph. 20 years of waiting for someone to hear me, to help me. And you are the only one who can." The elevator had fully risen now, its floor level with the 6th floor hallway where Joseph stood. Thomas made no move to step out. He simply stood there, his hands at his sides, watching Joseph with eyes that held a depth of sadness that was almost unbearable to witness. Joseph felt his legs trembling. He wanted to run, to flee this impossible situation and never look back. But he found he could not move. Something held him there, some combination of curiosity and guilt, and a need to understand that was stronger than his fear. "What do you want from me?" Joseph asked. "Why are you here? Why now, after all these years?" Thomas took a step closer to the elevator opening, but did not cross the threshold. "Because you are in danger," he said quietly. "Because the same thing that happened to me is going to happen to you if you do not understand the truth. That night on the roof, Joseph, I did not jump. I was pushed. There was someone else there with me, someone who wanted me dead, and they succeeded. But before I died, in those last seconds as I fell, I understood something. This building, it holds on to things. It holds on to pain and violence and secrets. It does not let them go. And now it has you, just as it had me. Joseph felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the cold air. "Who pushed you?" he asked. "Who was on that roof with you?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "That is the question I've been trying to answer for 20 years. I remember climbing the stairs. I remember the door being unlocked, which surprised me because you always kept it locked. I remember stepping out onto the roof and seeing someone standing there, waiting for me. But I cannot remember the face. It is like there is a blank space in my memory where that face should be. All I remember is hands pushing me, and then the fall, and then darkness. And then I woke up here, in this elevator, trapped between floors, trapped between life and death, unable to move on." Joseph's mind reeled. Nothing Thomas was saying made sense, and yet he could not deny the evidence of his own eyes and ears. The young man standing before him was real in some way that defied explanation. But if what he was saying was true, if he had indeed been murdered, then who had done it? And why? Joseph remembered that night with painful clarity. He had heard the crash and gone up to investigate. He had seen Thomas on the roof, silhouetted against the sky. But had there been someone else there? He tried to recall, searching his memory for any detail he might have missed. The door had been open. Snow had been blowing in. And there had been footsteps. He was certain of it. 2 sets of footsteps, not just one. He had mentioned this to the police, but they had dismissed it. "Why can you not leave the elevator?" Joseph asked. "Why are you trapped here?" Thomas looked down at his hands, turning them over as if examining them for the first time. "I do not fully understand it myself. When I died, something in this building held on to me. Maybe it was the violence of what happened. Maybe it was unfinished business. All I know is that I cannot leave this elevator car. I can move it up and down between floors when enough energy builds up, and I can reach out sometimes, make phone calls, move small objects. But I cannot cross the threshold. I am bound here, and I will remain bound here until the truth is revealed, until justice is served." Joseph rubbed his face with both hands, trying to clear his thoughts. This was madness. He should leave, call the police, call a priest, call someone who could deal with this impossible situation. But even as the thoughts formed, he knew he would not leave. 20 years ago he had failed Thomas. He had suspected something was wrong, had questioned the official story, but had not pushed hard enough. He had let it go, had allowed himself to be convinced that it was none of his business, and Thomas had been left here, trapped and alone, for 2 decades. Joseph could not fail him again. "What do you need me to do?" Joseph asked. Thomas looked up, and for the first time, something like hope flickered in his eyes. "I need you to find out who killed me. I need you to discover the truth and bring it to light. Only then can I be free. Only then can this building release its hold on me. But Joseph, you must be careful. Whoever did this, they are still out there. And if they learn that you are investigating, they will come for you too. This building has already claimed one life. It will not hesitate to claim another." Joseph felt fear coil in his stomach, but alongside it was something else, something he had not felt in years. Purpose. For 20 years he had simply existed, going through the motions of life without really living. But now, standing here in this haunted hallway, facing the ghost of a murdered man, he felt truly alive for the first time since Anna had died. He had a reason to act, a mission to fulfill. He would find out who killed Thomas Svoboda. He would uncover the truth that had been buried for 20 years, and he would set things right. "I will help you," Joseph said firmly. "I will find out what happened. I promise you." Thomas nodded slowly, and something like relief washed over his features. "Thank you. But we must start now. There is not much time. The building knows I have reached out to you. It knows what we are trying to do, and it will resist. This place does not want its secrets revealed. You will need to search my old office. I kept files, documents, things I had discovered in the months before my death. I was investigating something wrong happening in this building. That is why I was killed. Find those files, Joseph. They will lead you to the truth." "Where is your office?" Joseph asked. Thomas pointed down the hallway. "Third door on the right. It has been empty since I died. No one has touched it. The company I worked for left everything in place when they moved out. The key should still be on your ring. It is marked 306. Joseph looked down at the heavy key ring attached to his belt. He had dozens of keys there, accumulated over 30 years. He found the one marked 306 and held it up. Thomas nodded. "That is the one. Go now. I will wait here. I cannot leave anyway. But Joseph, be careful. The building is watching. It is always watching." Joseph turned toward the hallway, then paused and looked back. "Will you still be here when I return?" he asked. Thomas smiled that sad smile again. "I have been here for 20 years. I will not leave now. Not until this is finished." Joseph nodded and began walking down the dark hallway toward room 306, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Behind him, he could hear the elevator humming softly, and he knew without looking that Thomas was still there, watching him go, hoping that after 20 years of waiting, justice might finally be within reach. The hallway stretched before Joseph like a tunnel into the past. His flashlight beam swept across walls that had once been white, but were now yellowed with age and neglect. Water stains spread across the ceiling in abstract patterns. The carpet beneath his feet was worn thin, its original color impossible to determine. Doors lined both sides of the hallway, most of them standing slightly ajar, revealing the empty offices beyond. 20 years ago, these rooms had been filled with desks and filing cabinets, and people working at their daily tasks. Now they were tombs, silent and abandoned, holding only dust and memories. Joseph reached the third door on the right and stopped. The number 306 was still visible on the frosted glass panel, though the letters were faded and barely legible. His hand trembled slightly as he inserted the key into the lock. For a moment it resisted, the mechanism stiff from years of disuse, but then it turned with a soft click. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. The smell hit him immediately, the musty odor of a space that had been sealed for 2 decades. Stale air and old paper, and something else. Something he could not quite identify, but that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He stepped inside and swept his flashlight around the room. It was a small office, perhaps 3 meters by 4 meters, with a single window that looked out onto an air shaft. A metal desk sat against one wall, its surface still covered with papers and files, exactly as Thomas must have left them on that last day. A filing cabinet stood in the corner. A wooden chair was pushed back from the desk, as if its occupant had just stood up and walked away. On the wall hung a calendar, forever frozen on February of 1999. The room was like a time capsule, perfectly preserved, waiting for someone to return who never would. Joseph approached the desk carefully, as if he might disturb something sacred. The papers on its surface were covered with numbers and calculations, financial records of some kind. Thomas had been an accountant, he remembered, working for a small investment company that had occupied several offices on this floor. Joseph picked up one of the papers and squinted at it in the flashlight beam. It was a balance sheet, columns of figures that meant nothing to him. But Thomas had circled several entries in red pen and written notes in the margins. Discrepancy, one note read. Does not match. Another said, "Where did this money go?" Joseph set the paper down and began searching through the others. More financial documents, more notes in Thomas's neat handwriting. The pattern became clear. Thomas had been tracking something, some irregularity in the company's accounts. Money was missing, large amounts of it, and Thomas had been trying to figure out where it had gone. Joseph found a notebook buried under the papers, a small black ledger with a cloth cover. He opened it and began to read. The entries were dated, starting about 6 months before Thomas's death. November the 3rd, 1998. Found another discrepancy in the quarterly report. Nearly 2 million crowns unaccounted for. Need to dig deeper. Joseph flipped through the pages, reading Thomas's increasingly worried observations. The young accountant had discovered systematic embezzlement, money being siphoned from client accounts and hidden through false entries and manipulated records. And he had been trying to identify who was responsible. December 7th. Spoke with Marek today. He seems nervous. Avoided my questions. December the 20th. Found evidence linking the missing funds to offshore accounts. Need to confirm before taking this to authorities. January 15th, 1999. I am certain now. It goes all the way to the top. The managing director is involved. Maybe others too. I need to be careful. If they find out what I know, I could be in danger. Joseph felt his blood run cold as he read those last words. Thomas had known he was in danger. He had known that what he was investigating could get him killed. And less than a month later, he was dead, fallen from the roof in what was ruled a suicide. But it was not suicide. It was murder, designed to look like suicide, to silence a man who had discovered too much. Joseph's hands shook as he turned the pages. The final entry was dated February 9th, 1999, exactly 1 week before Thomas died. I have compiled all the evidence. Tomorrow I will take it to the police. I cannot wait any longer. If anything happens to me, I have hidden copies of all documents in a safe place. The key is with someone I trust. Joseph stared at those words. Copies of all documents, hidden in a safe place. The key with someone he trusted. But where? And who had Thomas trusted? Joseph searched the desk drawers frantically, pulling them open one by one. Office supplies, old pens, paper clips, rubber bands. Nothing that looked like evidence. Nothing that would help him understand where Thomas had hidden the proof of what he had discovered. He moved to the filing cabinet and began going through it, folder by folder. Client files, tax records, correspondence. All routine business materials. Nothing incriminating. Nothing that would explain why Thomas had been killed. He was about to give up when his flashlight beam fell on something odd. Behind the filing cabinet, in the narrow space between it and the wall, something was wedged. Joseph grabbed the cabinet and pulled, his old muscles straining. It moved a few inches, just enough for him to reach behind it. His fingers closed on a small metal box, the kind used to store cash or important documents. He pulled it out and set it on the desk. It was locked, secured with a combination lock. Joseph tried the latch anyway, knowing it was futile. The box remained sealed. He picked up the notebook again and flipped through it, looking for any numbers that might be a combination. Birth dates, account numbers, anything. On the last page, partially hidden by a coffee stain, he found 3 numbers written separately. 7, 23, 41. Joseph tried the combination on the lock. It clicked open. Inside the box were documents, photocopies of financial records, bank statements, offshore account information, and a list of names. Joseph recognized several of them. The managing director of the investment company, 2 senior accountants, and one name that made his breath catch in his throat. Pavel Dvorak, building superintendent. Pavel Dvorak had been Joseph's predecessor, the man who had held his job before him. Joseph had met him only briefly during the transition period when Joseph was hired to replace him. Pavel had left the position suddenly in March of 1999, just 1 month after Thomas's death, claiming family reasons. Joseph had never thought much about it. People left jobs all the time. But now, seeing Pavel's name on this list of people involved in embezzlement, Joseph understood. Pavel had been part of it. He had been working with the others, using his access to the building to help them hide their crimes. And when Thomas discovered the truth, Pavel had been the one to silence him. Joseph felt sick. Pavel had been the building superintendent. He would have had keys to everything, including the roof. He could have unlocked the door, lured Thomas up there with some pretext, and pushed him to his death. And because Joseph had taken over Pavel's position, no one had questioned why the roof door was unlocked that night. They had assumed Joseph had simply forgotten to secure it, a simple mistake. But it had not been a mistake. It had been murder, carefully planned and executed. Joseph gathered up the documents and the notebook and put them back in the metal box. This was evidence. This could prove that Thomas had been murdered. But who could he take it to? The police had closed the case 20 years ago. Would they reopen it based on old documents found in a dusty office? And what if some of the people involved were still in positions of power? What if they found out he was asking questions? Thomas had said he was in danger. The building has already claimed 1 life, he had said. It will not hesitate to claim another. Joseph looked around the office one more time. The calendar on the wall, the papers on the desk, the chair pushed back as if waiting for someone to return. This had been Thomas's workspace, his daily environment, the place where he had spent his last days piecing together a puzzle that would cost him his life. And now, 20 years later, Joseph was standing in the same place, holding the same evidence, facing the same danger. The weight of it pressed down on him like a physical burden. He was 68 years old. He was tired. He was alone. But he had made a promise to Thomas, and he would keep it. He tucked the metal box under his arm and walked back to the door. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard a sound from somewhere below. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Someone else was in the building. Joseph froze, his heart hammering. He had locked the front doors. The back entrance was secured. No one should be here except him and the ghost of Thomas Svoboda. But someone was here, someone real and solid, climbing the stairs toward him. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Joseph looked back toward the elevator where Thomas waited. Then he looked toward the stairs where the footsteps were coming from. He had to make a choice. Hide or confront whoever was coming. And he had to make it now. Joseph's instinct screamed at him to hide, to find a dark corner and wait until whoever was climbing those stairs had passed. But another part of him, the part that had made the promise to Thomas, knew that hiding would solve nothing. If someone was here, if someone knew he was investigating, then hiding would only delay the inevitable confrontation. He gripped the metal box tighter under his arm and moved quietly toward the elevator, where Thomas waited. The footsteps continued their steady climb, echoing through the stairwell. Second floor, third floor, coming closer with each passing second. Joseph reached the elevator and looked inside. Thomas was still there, standing exactly where he had been, his face pale in the wool, yellow light. Joseph held up the metal box. "I found it," Joseph whispered. "I found the evidence." Thomas nodded slowly, but his expression was troubled. "Someone is coming," he said quietly. "Someone who does not want you to have that. You need to leave, Joseph, now. Take the back stairs and get out of the building." But Joseph shook his head. "I cannot leave you here. Not again." Thomas smiled sadly. "I am already gone, Joseph. I have been gone for 20 years. But you are alive, and you need to stay that way. Go. Please." The footsteps had reached the 5th floor now. Joseph could hear them clearly, heavy boots on concrete stairs. He looked down the hallway toward the back stairwell, calculating the distance. He could make it if he ran. But running meant leaving Thomas, meant abandoning the only witness to what had happened here. And something in Joseph rebelled against that idea. He had spent 20 years living in the shadow of guilt, wondering if he could have done more to help Thomas, to uncover the truth. He would not run now, not when he was so close to answers. He turned back to Thomas. "Who is coming?" he asked. "Do you know?" Thomas's eyes grew distant, as if he was sensing something Joseph could not perceive. "Pavel," he said softly. "It is Pavel Dvorak. He knows you found the evidence. The building told him. It always tells him. He comes here sometimes, even now, after all these years. He comes to make sure his secret stays buried." Joseph felt his blood turn to ice. Pavel Dvorak, the man whose name was on the list, the man who had almost certainly pushed Thomas to his death, was here in the building right now. And he knew what Joseph had discovered. The footsteps reached the 6th floor landing. Joseph heard the stairwell door open with a rusty creak. He pressed himself against the wall beside the elevator, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. It was heavy enough to use as a club if necessary. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Shadows moved in the hallway as someone emerged from the stairwell. Then a voice, rough and aged, but still recognizable, called out, "Joseph, I know you are here. I saw the light from outside. Come out. We need to talk." Pavel Dvorak stepped into view, and Joseph felt a shock of recognition. The man had aged considerably in 20 years, his hair now completely white, his face lined and weathered. But it was definitely him. He was perhaps 70 years old now, thick-shouldered and solid, wearing a heavy coat and work boots. In his right hand, he carried a tire iron, holding it casually, but with clear intent. His eyes, when they found Joseph, were hard and cold. "Hello, Joseph," Pavel said. "Been a long time. I see you found Thomas's little treasure box. That is unfortunate. I had hoped it would stay lost." Joseph stepped away from the wall, keeping the metal box behind him. "What are you doing here, Pavel?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "How did you know I was investigating?" Pavel smiled without humor. "I have been watching this building for 20 years, Joseph, making sure no one got too curious, making sure certain things stayed hidden. When I saw the lights on up here tonight, in Thomas's old office, I knew someone had finally found what they should not have found. And here you are, playing detective at 68 years old. You should have stayed in your little office, drinking tea and reading your newspaper. Now things have to get complicated." Joseph felt anger rising through his fear. "You killed him," he said. "You killed Thomas and made it look like suicide." Pavel shrugged. He was going to ruin everything. He was going to take evidence to the police. "Do you know how much money was involved?" "Almost 10 million crowns. My share alone was enough to retire on. I was not going to let some self-righteous accountant destroy that because of his precious ethics. So yes, I killed him. I called him, told him there was a problem with the roof access, something he needed to see as the building's emergency contact. He came up because he was responsible like that, and I pushed him. Simple. Clean. Until now." The casual way Pavel described murder made Josef's stomach turn. "And you got away with it," Josef said. "You took your money and left, and no one ever suspected." Pavel nodded. "I moved to Brno, bought a nice house, lived well. But I could never quite leave this place behind. The building holds on to you, you know. It gets into your bones. So I come back sometimes, just to check, to make sure the past stays buried. And tonight, I am glad I did." He hefted the tire iron meaningfully. "Give me the box, Joseph. Give it to me, and we can both walk away from this. You go back to your quiet life, and I go back to mine. No one needs to know what happened here." Joseph took a step backward, closer to the elevator. "I am not giving you anything," he said. "This evidence proves what you did. It proves Thomas was murdered. I am taking it to the police." Pavel's expression hardened. "No, you are not. You are an old man, Joseph, alone in an abandoned building in the middle of the night. If something happens to you, who would know? Who would care? They would find you at the bottom of the same stairwell where Thomas fell. 2 tragedies, 20 years apart. The building would have claimed another victim. That is all." He began walking toward Joseph, the tire iron raised. Josef's mind raced. He was not a fighter. He had never been a fighter, and Pavel was larger, stronger, armed. But Josef had something Pavel did not have. He had the truth, and he had Thomas. "Josef," Thomas's voice came from the elevator. urgent and commanding. "Step inside, quickly." Joseph did not hesitate. He ducked into the elevator car, and immediately he felt a change. The air grew colder. The light brightened. And Thomas was suddenly more solid, more present, more real than he had been before. Pavel stopped at the elevator opening, his eyes widening. "Thomas," he breathed. "But that is impossible. You are dead." Thomas stepped forward, his face no longer sad, but filled with a cold anger that made even Joseph flinch. "Yes, Pavel, I am dead. You made sure of that. But I am not gone. I have been here all along, waiting, watching. And now Joseph has found the truth. Now the world will know what you did." Pavel stumbled backward, his face pale. "This is not real. You are not real." Thomas smiled, a terrible smile. "I am real enough. And this building, Pavel, it remembers. It remembers everything. Every crime. Every sin. Every drop of blood spilled within its walls. You thought you could walk away. But the building never forgets. And neither do I." The lights in the hallway began to flicker. The temperature dropped further until Joseph could see his breath misting in the air. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows deepening and moving with a life of their own. Pavel backed away, terror replacing the confidence he had shown moments before. "What is happening?" he gasped. "What is this?" Thomas stepped to the edge of the elevator, but did not cross the threshold. "This is justice, Pavel. This is what you have been running from for 20 years. The building wants its due, and tonight it will have it." Joseph watched in horrified fascination as the hallway around Pavel began to change. The walls seemed to ripple and shift. Doors opened and closed on their own. From somewhere deep in the building came a sound like a groan, like the structure itself was waking from a long sleep. Pavel dropped the tire iron and ran toward the stairwell, but the door slammed shut before he could reach it. He pulled at the handle desperately, but it would not open. "I am sorry," he screamed. "I am sorry for what I did. Please, please let me go." Thomas looked at Joseph. "You should leave now," he said quietly. "What happens next is between Pavel and this building. Take the evidence. Go to the police. Tell them everything. Make sure the truth is known." Joseph clutched the metal box and nodded. "What about you?" he asked. "What will happen to you?" Thomas smiled, and this time it was the sad smile Joseph had seen before. "Maybe when the truth is revealed, when justice is served, I will finally be able to rest. Maybe the building will let me go. Or maybe I will stay here forever, watching over this place. Either way, it does not matter. What matters is that the truth comes out. That matters more than anything." Joseph wanted to say something, to thank Thomas, to tell him he was sorry for not fighting harder 20 years ago. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply nodded and turned away, walking quickly toward the back stairwell. Behind him, he heard Pavel screaming, heard sounds he could not identify, and did not want to understand. The building groaned and creaked around him, as if it was settling into some new configuration. Joseph ran down the stairs, his old legs protesting, the metal box clutched against his chest. He burst out of the back entrance into the cold night air, gasping and trembling. Joseph stood in the cool alley behind the Mrazek building, bent over with his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. Rain fell steadily, soaking through his coat and running down his face, mixing with the sweat and tears he had not realized he was crying. The metal box was still clutched against his chest, its edges digging into his ribs. Behind him, the building loomed dark and silent, but he could feel it watching him, aware of him in some way he could not explain. He forced himself to straighten up and look back at the structure that had been his workplace for 30 years. It looked different now, malevolent somehow, as if a mask had been removed to reveal something ancient and hungry beneath. He had to get away from here, had to get somewhere safe where he could think, where he could decide what to do next. His apartment was 3 blocks away, but the thought of going there frightened him. If Pavel had been watching the building all these years, did he know where Josef lived? Did he know everything about Josef's life, his routines, his vulnerabilities? Josef felt exposed and hunted, as if invisible eyes were tracking his every movement. He began walking, staying close to the buildings, avoiding the streetlights. The rain was actually helpful now, giving him cover, keeping the streets empty. No one was out in this weather except fools and desperate men, and Josef supposed he qualified as both. He reached his apartment building and paused at the entrance, scanning the street for any sign of pursuit. Everything looked normal. Cars parked along the curb, dark windows in the buildings across the street, the hiss of rain on pavement. He fumbled with his keys and let himself inside, climbing the stairs to his 3rd-floor apartment with legs that felt like rubber. Once inside, he locked the door behind him, threw the deadbolt, and slid the security chain into place. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. The apartment was small and sparse, the home of a man who owned little and needed less. A single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a living room with an old sofa and a television he rarely watched. Pictures of Anna hung on the walls, frozen moments from a life that felt impossibly distant now. Josef set the metal box on the kitchen table and stared at it. This small container held the key to everything, evidence of embezzlement, proof of murder, names and dates and documents that could destroy livelihood and reputations. And Pavel Dvorak knew Josef had it. Whatever had happened to Pavel in that building, whether the structure itself had exacted some supernatural justice or Pavel had simply fled in terror, the man was still out there, still dangerous, still desperate to keep his secrets buried. Josef made himself a cup of tea with shaking hands and sat down at the table. He opened the metal box and spread the contents across the scratched wooden surface. Bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts, photocopied ledgers with entries highlighted in yellow, the bottomholes, notebook with Thomas's careful handwriting documenting his investigation. The list of names. Josef picked up the notebook and read through it again, more carefully this time. Thomas had been methodical, patient, building his case step by step. He had identified the pattern of theft, tracked the money through multiple accounts, and finally connected it to specific individuals. The managing director, whose name was Viktor Cerny, 2 senior accountants, Martin Kolar and Yana Benesova, and Pavel Dvorak, who had used his position as building superintendent to facilitate the crime, perhaps by providing access to offices after hours, perhaps by destroying evidence, perhaps by doing exactly what he had done to Thomas when the truth threatened to emerge. Josef picked up his telephone and stared at it. He should call the police. That was the obvious thing to do. Take the evidence to them and let them handle it. But doubt gnawed at him. 20 years had passed. Would they even take him seriously? Would they believe that the suicide of Thomas Svoboda had actually been murder? And what if some of the people involved still had influence, still had connections? Thomas had written that the corruption went all the way to the top. What if that was still true? What if reporting this put Joseph in even greater danger? He set down the phone and rubbed his tired eyes. He was 68 years old. He was a janitor, not a detective. He had no experience with this kind of situation. But he had made a promise to Thomas, and the evidence in front of him was real and damning. He could not simply ignore it, could not pretend this night had never happened. The memory of Thomas standing in that elevator, trapped for 20 years between life and death, would haunt Joseph forever if he did nothing. He picked up the phone again and dialed. Not the police. Not yet. First, he needed advice from someone he trusted. The phone rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello?" "Joseph," his brother Peter said. "Do you know what time it is? It is past 11 o'clock. Joseph felt relief wash over him at the sound of his brother's voice. "Peter," he said, "I need your help. I need to talk to someone, and you are the only person I trust." There was a pause. Then Peter's voice came back, more alert now. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" Joseph looked at the documents spread across his table. "I am fine, but I have discovered something dangerous, and I do not know what to do about it. Can you come to Brno? Can you come tomorrow?" Peter lived in Germany now, had lived there for 15 years. He was a lawyer, successful and respected, exactly the kind of person who would know how to handle a situation like this. "Joseph," Peter said carefully, "what have you discovered? Tell me." Joseph took a deep breath and began to explain. He told his brother about the phone call, about finding Thomas in the elevator, about the evidence in the metal box. He did not mention the supernatural elements, the way the building had seemed to come alive, the way Thomas's ghost had been solid and real. He knew how that would sound. Instead, he focused on the facts, the embezzlement, the murder, the cover-up, Pavel Dvorak's confession, the evidence that proved everything. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Peter spoke. "Joseph, this is serious. If what you are saying is true, you could be in real danger. You need to go to the police immediately. Tonight. Do not wait." Joseph shook his head, even though his brother could not see him. "I cannot go tonight. I need to think. I need to make sure I am doing this right. If I go to the police with a story about a 20-year-old murder and they do not believe me, then I have shown my hand and gained nothing." Peter sighed. "Then wait until morning. First thing, and I will drive to Brno tonight. I should be there by morning. We will go to the police together. Do not do anything until I arrive. Do you understand? Stay in your apartment, lock your doors, and for God's sake, keep that evidence safe." Joseph agreed and hung up. He gathered the documents and put them back in the metal box, then carried it to his bedroom. He lifted the mattress and slid the box underneath, then arranged the bedding to hide any sign of disturbance. It was not a sophisticated hiding place, but it would have to do for now. He was exhausted, his body aching from the physical and emotional strain of the night, but he knew he would not sleep. Every sound in the building made him jump. Every creak of settling wood, every footstep from the apartment above, every car passing on the street outside sent adrenaline spiking through his system. He sat on the sofa in his living room with all the lights on and tried to make sense of what had happened. He had seen a ghost, had spoken with a dead man, had watched as some force within the Mrazek building had turned against Pavel Dvorak. None of it made rational sense. Joseph had never been a religious man, had never believed in spirits or an afterlife. But he could not deny what he had experienced. Thomas had been real. The elevator had been real. The supernatural justice enacted on Pavel had been real. The building was more than just concrete and steel and glass. It was something alive, something that remembered and judged and exacted its own form of justice. Joseph thought about all the years he had spent in that building, walking its halls, cleaning its floors, feeling occasionally unsettled, but never understanding why. The sounds he had heard, the cold spots, the feeling of being watched. It had all been real. The building had been trying to communicate, trying to make him understand. And tonight, finally, it had succeeded. Thomas had reached out across the barrier between life and death, and Joseph had listened, had believed, had acted. And now, there was no going back. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked street below. Somewhere out there, Pavel Dvorak was either dead or alive, either destroyed by the building's wrath, or fled in terror. Joseph did not know which, and part of him did not want to know. What mattered now was the evidence, the proof that could give Thomas the justice he had been denied for 20 years. Tomorrow, Peter would arrive. Together, they would go to the police. Together, they would make sure the truth was revealed. And then, perhaps, Thomas would finally be free. Perhaps the building would release him. Perhaps the long nightmare would end. But even as Joseph tried to convince himself that everything would be resolved, doubt lingered. He remembered Thomas's words. The building wants its due. What did that mean? What did the building want beyond justice for Thomas? And why had it waited 20 years to act? These questions circled in Joseph's mind like vultures, refusing to land, refusing to be answered. He turned away from the window and looked at the photographs of Anna on the walls. She smiled at him from those frozen moments, forever young, forever happy. What would she think of what he was doing? Would she tell him he was brave, or would she tell him he was a fool risking his life for a ghost? He would never know. Anna was gone, truly gone, not trapped between worlds like Thomas, but simply absent. Her spirit moved on to wherever spirits go. Joseph envied her that clean departure. And he envied Peter his distance from all of this, his normal life in Germany with his wife and children and law practice. But envy solved nothing. Joseph was here, alone in his small apartment, holding evidence of murder and waiting for morning to come. All he could do was wait, and hope that when the sun rose, he would still be alive to see it. Joseph must have dozed off on the sofa some time before dawn, because he woke with a start to find pale morning light filtering through the windows. His neck ached from the awkward position he had slept in, and his mouth was dry. For a moment, he wondered if the events of the previous night had been a dream, some elaborate nightmare brought on by stress and loneliness. But then he remembered the metal box under his mattress, and he knew it had all been real. He pushed himself up from the sofa, joints protesting, and went to the bedroom to check. The box was still there, solid and undeniable. Relief and dread washed over him in equal measure. He made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the street below. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving the pavement wet and glistening. Early morning traffic was beginning to build, people heading to work, to school, to their normal daily lives. Joseph envied them their normalcy. He showered and dressed in clean clothes, trying to prepare himself mentally for what lay ahead. Peter would arrive soon. They would go to the police together. The truth would come out. Justice would be served. He repeated these thoughts like a mantra, trying to convince himself that everything would be simple and straightforward. At 8:30, his doorbell rang. Joseph looked through the peephole and saw his brother standing in the hallway. Peter looked tired, his usually neat hair disheveled, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. Joseph opened the door and embraced him, feeling a wave of emotion he had not expected. It had been nearly a year since they had seen each other in person. Peter stepped inside, and immediately his lawyer's eyes began assessing the situation. "Show me," he said without preamble. "Show me this evidence." Joseph retrieved the metal box from under the mattress and brought it to the kitchen table. Peter sat down and began going through the contents methodically, reading each document carefully, making occasional notes on a pad he had brought with him. Joseph watched his brother's face, trying to gauge his reaction. After perhaps 20 minutes, Peter sat back and rubbed his eyes. "This is explosive," he said quietly. "If this is authentic, and I have no reason to believe it is not, then this proves systematic embezzlement and provides a clear motive for murder. The question is what we do with it now." Joseph felt a surge of relief. "So you believe me? You believe Thomas was murdered?" Peter nodded slowly. "Based on this evidence, yes. The suicide ruling was clearly wrong. But Joseph, there is a problem. A big problem." He picked up the list of names. Victor Kearney, the managing director. "Do you know what happened to him after the company folded?" Joseph shook his head. Peter took a deep breath. "He went into politics. He is currently a member of Parliament. He has connections, influence, power. If we accuse him of embezzlement and conspiracy to murder, there will be consequences. He will fight back with everything he has. And the other names on this list, I looked them up on my phone while you were showering. Martin Kolar is dead, died in a car accident 10 years ago. Jana Benesova emigrated to Canada, and Pavel Dvorak, according to public records, still lives in Brno." Joseph felt his stomach tighten at the mention of Pavel's name. "About Pavel," he said. "Something happened last night. Something I did not tell you on the phone because I knew how it would sound." Peter looked at him intently. "What happened?" Joseph hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding it. "When Pavel found me in the building, he confessed. He admitted to killing Thomas. He tried to kill me, too. But something stopped him. The building itself, I think. It was like the place came alive. And Thomas was there. Thomas's ghost. He helped me escape." Peter stared at him for a long moment. "Joseph," he said carefully, "I know you have been alone for a long time. I know the past few years have been hard, but you cannot tell that story to the police. They will think you are having some kind of breakdown. We need to stick to the facts, the evidence. Nothing about ghosts or buildings coming alive." Joseph felt frustration rise in him. "I know what I saw, Peter. I know what happened." Peter held up his hands. "I am not saying you are lying. I am saying that what you experienced, whether it was real or a product of stress and fear, cannot be part of our statement to the police. We present the documents. We explain that you found them while doing your job. We let the evidence speak for itself. Understand? Joseph wanted to argue, but he knew his brother was right. He nodded reluctantly. Petter gathered the documents back into the metal box. We should go now. The police station is only a few blocks from here. We will ask to speak with a detective, someone senior who can understand the importance of this. Joseph stood and reached for his coat, but before he could put it on, there was a knock at his door. Both men froze. Joseph, someone called from the hallway. It is Pavel. We need to talk. Please, I am not here to hurt you. I just need to talk. Joseph and Petter looked at each other in shock. How did he find you? Petter whispered. Joseph shook his head. He must have followed me last night. Must have been watching to see where I went. The knocking came again, more insistent. Joseph, please. I know you are in there. I can explain everything. What happened last night? What really happened? You need to hear this. Petter moved toward the door. I will handle this. You call the police. But Joseph grabbed his arm. Wait. Let me hear what he has to say. If he confesses again, you will be a witness. Petter looked doubtful but nodded. Joseph went to the door, but did not open it. He spoke through the wood. What do you want, Pavel? There was a long silence. Then Pavel's voice came back, and it sounded different than it had the night before. Less confident, almost frightened. I need to tell you the truth, the real truth. I did not kill Thomas. I was there that night, yes. I unlocked the roof door, but I did not push him. Someone else did. Someone who paid me to provide access and then disappear. Someone who has been controlling everything from the beginning. Joseph felt his certainty waver. He looked at Peter, who frowned and shook his head, clearly thinking this was a trick. Who? Joseph called through the door. Who paid you? Victor Kearney, Pavel said. But he did not do it himself. He sent someone else. Someone Thomas trusted. Someone who could get close to him without raising suspicion. Joseph felt ice forming in his stomach. Who, Pavel? Who killed Thomas? There was another long pause. Your wife, Joseph. Anna killed Thomas Svoboda. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Joseph grabbed the door frame to steady himself. That is impossible, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Anna died 12 years ago. She had nothing to do with any of this. Pavel's voice was sad, almost gentle. I am sorry, Joseph. I am so sorry. But it is true. Anna worked for Victor Kearney's company. She was his personal assistant. She was part of the embezzlement scheme from the beginning. When Thomas started investigating, Victor could not risk being seen anywhere near him. So he sent Anna. She met Thomas on the roof. She pushed him. And I helped cover it up. Because Victor paid me. Paid me very well. But Anna made me promise never to tell you. She loved you, Joseph. She did not want you to know what she had done. So I kept the secret, even after she died. Joseph's legs gave out. He sank to the floor, his back against the door, his mind reeling. Peter knelt beside him. Joseph, this could be a lie. He could be making this up to confuse you, to buy time. Do not believe him. But Joseph was remembering things now, details he had never questioned before. Anna had worked for Victor Kearney. That was true. She had always been vague about what her job entailed, always changed the subject when he asked. And in the months after Thomas died, she had been different. withdrawn, troubled. He had attributed it to stress from work, had not pushed her to talk about it. But what if it had been guilt? What if she had been carrying the weight of murder all those years? Pavel was still talking through the door. The evidence Thomas compiled, it has Anna's name in the files. I know because I saw them before I hid the box in his office. I could not destroy them because Victor wanted insurance, wanted proof of everyone's involvement in case anyone tried to turn against him. That is why Anna's name is there. Check the documents again, Joseph. You will see. Joseph looked at Petter, who was already pulling documents from the metal box. Petter flipped through pages rapidly, his expression growing more troubled. Joseph, he said quietly, there is a name here. Anna Novakova, listed as assistant to Viktor Cerny. And there are notations in Thomas's handwriting, questions about transactions she processed, suspicions about her involvement. Joseph felt his world crumbling. Everything he had believed about his wife, about their life together, was built on lies. She had been a thief, a murderer, and she had hidden it from him for years, had lived with him knowing what she had done, had died taking the secret with her, or so she had thought. Joseph, Pavel called. I know this is hard, but you need to know the whole truth. Viktor Cerny is the one who should pay for this. He orchestrated everything. He used all of us. Anna, me, the others. He is the one who belongs in prison. But if you go to the police with that evidence, they will destroy Anna's memory. They will make her the villain. Is that what you want? Petter stood up, his face hard. This is manipulation, Joseph. He is trying to protect himself by making you doubt. We go to the police now. Let them investigate. Let them determine the truth. But Joseph could not move, could not think. The image of Anna, his sweet Anna who had loved gardens and music and quiet evenings at home, that image was shattering like glass. In its place was someone he did not know, someone capable of murder. How could he have lived with her for so many years and never seen it? How could he have been so blind? Petter pulled him to his feet. We are leaving. Now. He grabbed the metal box and guided Joseph toward the door. But before they could open it, Joseph heard footsteps running away down the hallway. Pavel was gone, fled again, leaving behind his poisoned words. Joseph stood numbly as Peter opened the door and checked the hallway. Empty. Peter turned back to him. Whatever Pavel said, whether it is true or not, does not change what we need to do. We take this evidence to the police. They will investigate properly. They will determine who killed Thomas. If Anna was involved, then that is something we will have to accept. But you cannot let him manipulate you into protecting murderers. Joseph nodded slowly. His brother was right. The truth had to come out, no matter how much it hurt, no matter what it revealed about the woman he had loved. They left the apartment together, Petter carrying the metal box, Joseph moving like a man in a dream. But as they walked toward the police station, Joseph could not stop thinking about Anna, could not stop seeing her face, hearing her voice, remembering the life they had shared, and he could not stop wondering if everything had been a lie. The police station was a modern building of glass and concrete, completely unlike the crumbling mrozek structure that had dominated Joseph's life for so long. Inside, everything was bright and efficient and impersonal. Peter approached the front desk and asked to speak with a detective about a murder case. The officer behind the desk, a young woman with tired eyes, looked skeptical but made a phone call. After a brief conversation, she directed them to wait in a small room down the hall. They sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs under fluorescent lights that buzzed softly, and Joseph tried to organize his thoughts. Everything felt surreal, disconnected from reality. Only the metal box sitting on Peter's lap felt solid and real. After 20 minutes, a detective entered the room. He was perhaps 50 years old, heavy-set, with grey hair and the weary expression of someone who had seen too much human darkness. He introduced himself as Detective Carl Marley and sat down across from them. "I understand you have information about a murder," he said, pulling out a notebook. Peter opened the metal box and began laying out the documents on the table between them. "This concerns the death of Thomas Svoboda in February of 1999, Peter said in his lawyer's voice, precise and measured. "It was ruled a suicide at the time, but we have evidence suggesting it was actually murder made to look like suicide." Detective Marley's expression did not change, but Joseph saw interest flicker in his eyes. He picked up Thomas's notebook and began reading. As he worked through the documents, his posture gradually shifted from skeptical to engaged. After perhaps 15 minutes, he looked up. "This is substantial," he said. "If authentic, this suggests systematic embezzlement and provides clear motive for murder. Where did you obtain these materials?" Joseph cleared his throat. "I found them last night in an office in the Mrazek building. I am the caretaker there. The office belonged to Thomas Svoboda. No one has touched it since his death." The detective made notes. "And what prompted you to search this office after 20 years? Joseph hesitated. He could not tell the truth, could not mention the phone call or Thomas's ghost or any of the supernatural elements. He glanced at Peter, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "I received an anonymous phone call," Joseph said. "Someone told me the elevator was stuck and someone was trapped inside. When I went to investigate, I found the old office area and decided to look around. That is when I discovered these documents. It was a weak story, and he could see the detective did not entirely believe it, but it was close enough to the truth to be credible." Detective Marley tapped his pen on his notebook. "The names in these documents," he said. "Victor Cerny. He is currently serving in Parliament. This is going to create significant problems. Accusations against a public figure require very careful handling." Peter leaned forward. "Which is exactly why we brought this to you first, rather than going to the media. We understand the sensitivity. But the evidence is clear. At minimum, this requires reopening the investigation into Thomas Svoboda's death." Detective Marley nodded slowly. "I agree. But I need to be honest with you. A case this old, with political implications, it will take time. We will need to verify these documents, track down witnesses, build a prosecutable case. And some of the people named here are dead or have left the country. It may not be possible to bring everyone to justice." Joseph spoke up, his voice rougher than he intended. "What about Pavel Dvorak? He is still alive. He is still in Brno. He was involved. He helped cover up the murder." The detective made another note. "We will want to interview him. Do you have an address?" Joseph shook his head. "I only know he lives somewhere in the city. But last night he came to my apartment. He admitted his involvement. He said he unlocked the roof door the night Thomas died. He said Victor Cerny paid him." Detective Marley looked up sharply. "He came to your apartment? When was this?" "This morning," Peter interjected. "About an hour ago. He knocked on the door and spoke to my brother through it. I was present. I heard him admit to being involved in covering up the murder. The detective's expression grew more serious. Did he threaten you? Did he try to enter? Joseph thought about how to answer. He said he wanted to talk. He said he wanted to tell me the truth. And then he said something that I do not know if I should believe. He said my wife, Anna, was the one who actually pushed Thomas off the roof. He said she worked for Victor Cerny and was part of the embezzlement scheme. The room fell silent. Detective Marley set down his pen. Your wife? Joseph nodded. Anna Novakova. She died 12 years ago. Cancer. Before last night, I had no idea she was involved in any of this. But her name is in the documents. Thomas suspected her involvement. The detective picked up the papers again and flipped through them until he found the relevant pages. He read in silence for a moment. There are notes here about Anna Novakova, he confirmed. Questions about transactions she processed. Suspicions about her role. But nothing definitive. No proof she committed murder. Just suspicions that she was involved in the financial crimes. Joseph felt a small spark of hope. So Pavel could have been lying. He could have been trying to protect himself by blaming someone who is dead and cannot defend herself. It is possible, Detective Marley said. Or it could be true. We will investigate. But Mr. Novak, I need to ask you some difficult questions about your wife, about what you knew and when you knew it. For the next hour, Joseph answered questions about Anna's job, about her relationship with Victor Cerny, about whether she had seemed troubled or guilty in the months after Thomas's death, about their finances, whether they had suddenly come into money that could not be explained. Joseph answered as honestly as he could, but the truth was, he had never paid much attention to such things. Anna had handled their finances. She had been the organized one, the planner. He had simply worked and come home and trusted that everything was in order. Now that trust felt like willful blindness. How much had he not seen because he chose not to look? Finally, the detective closed his notebook. We will open a formal investigation, he said. I cannot promise results quickly, but I can promise we will pursue this thoroughly. In the meantime, Mr. Novak, I need you to be very careful. If Pavel Dvorak knows you have this evidence, and if he is desperate enough to come to your home, he might try something more aggressive. Is there somewhere else you can stay for a few days? Petter spoke up. He will stay with me. I have a hotel room. We will stay together until this is resolved. The detective nodded approvingly. Good. And I will arrange for patrol cars to drive past your apartment regularly, Mr. Novak, and past the Mrazek building. If Dvorak shows up at either location, we will pick him up for questioning. They left the police station with the metal box now in Detective Marley's possession, officially entered into evidence. Joseph felt oddly hollow, as if something vital had been removed from him along with the documents. The evidence had been his burden, his responsibility, and now it belonged to the official machinery of justice. For better or worse, the truth would emerge through proper channels. But the process would be slow and bureaucratic, nothing like the supernatural justice he had witnessed in the Mrazek building the night before. Petter guided him to a nearby hotel where he had booked a room. It was clean and anonymous, with 2 beds and a window overlooking a parking lot. Joseph sat on one of the beds and stared at nothing. You should rest, Petter said gently. You have been through a tremendous shock. Joseph shook his head. I cannot rest, not until I know for certain whether Anna was involved. Not until I understand what really happened. Peter sat on the other bed, facing him. Joseph, even if Anna was involved, it does not change the fact that she loved you. People are complicated. They make terrible choices sometimes, choices that haunt them for the rest of their lives. But that does not erase the good things, the real things. Joseph looked at his brother. How can you say that? If she murdered someone, if she lived with me for years knowing what she had done, how can any of it have been real? Petter was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When Anna was dying, do you remember what she said to you? Joseph closed his eyes, remembering those final days in the hospital. Anna's body wasted by disease, her voice weak but still determined. She had made him promise to go on living, to not shut himself away from the world. She had told him she was sorry for not being a better wife, for not giving him children, for leaving him alone. At the time, he had thought she was simply being emotional, facing her mortality. But now those words took on a different meaning. Had she been apologizing for something else? For sins he did not know about? Joseph, Petter continued, whatever Anna did or did not do 20 years ago, she spent the last years of her life with cancer eating her alive. That is a terrible punishment. Maybe she carried guilt all those years. Maybe that guilt contributed to her illness. We will never know. But torturing yourself with questions about the past will not change anything. The police will investigate. The truth will come out. And you will have to find a way to live with whatever they discover. Joseph nodded. But he knew it would not be that simple. The image of Anna he had carried in his heart for 12 years was already changing, becoming complicated and uncertain. The woman he had loved and the woman who might have been a murderer. How could they be the same person? His phone rang, startling both of them. Joseph pulled it from his pocket and looked at the screen. Unknown number. He almost did not answer, but something made him press the button. Hello, he said cautiously. Joseph, a familiar voice replied, and Joseph's blood ran cold. It was Thomas. I need to see you. Tonight. At the building. There is something you need to understand before this goes any further. Something about Anna. Something only I can tell you. Joseph looked at Peter, who was watching him with concern. Who is it? Peter asked quietly. Joseph stood and walked to the window. Why should I come back there? He said into the phone. Why should I trust you? Because you need the truth, Thomas replied. And because I am the only one who can give it to you. I was there that night, Joseph. I saw what happened. I saw who pushed me. And it was not who you think. Come tonight, 10 o'clock. I will be waiting in the elevator. Come alone, or I cannot help you. The line went dead. Joseph stood, holding the phone, his reflection visible in the dark window glass. He looked old and tired and lost. Behind him, Peter stood. Joseph, who was that? What did they say? Joseph turned to face his brother. It was someone from the building. Someone who says they have information about Anna. About what really happened that night. I have to go back. Petter shook his head firmly. No. Absolutely not. It is too dangerous. It could be a trap. Dvorak could be trying to lure you back there. Joseph felt a strange calm settling over him. Maybe, he said. Or maybe it is the only way to get the answers I need. The police investigation will take weeks, maybe months. I cannot wait that long. I cannot live with this uncertainty. I need to know now. Tonight. Petter grabbed his arm. Then I am coming with you. Joseph pulled away gently. No. I was told to come alone. And besides, you would not understand. You would not believe. This is something I have to do myself. He looked at his watch. It was 2 p.m. 8 hours until he had to be at the Mrazek building. 8 hours to prepare himself for whatever truth was waiting in the darkness. The hours until 10 o'clock passed with excruciating slowness. Joseph tried to rest, but could not. He tried to eat, but had no appetite. Petter argued with him repeatedly, trying to convince him not to go back to the Mrazek building, but Joseph remained firm. Finally, at 9:30, Joseph stood and put on his coat. Petter made one last attempt. At least let me follow you. Let me wait outside in case something goes wrong. Joseph shook his head. If something goes wrong, calling the police will be more useful than trying to help me yourself. But nothing will go wrong. I am just going to talk to someone. That is all. He did not believe his own words, and he could see that Petter did not believe them either. But there was nothing more to say. Joseph walked through the night streets toward the Mrazek building, his footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalks. The city felt different at this hour, quieter and somehow more honest, stripped of its daytime pretenses. Streetlights cast pools of yellow illumination that did nothing to dispel the deeper darkness between them. Joseph's shadow stretched long and distorted ahead of him, leading the way like a ghost. As he approached the building, he felt the familiar weight of its presence, that sense of being watched by something vast and patient. The structure loomed against the night sky, most of its windows dark, a few reflecting the glow from the street. It looked like a skull, Joseph thought, empty eye sockets staring at nothing. He used his key to unlock the front entrance and stepped inside. The lobby was dark, except for the single bulb that stayed on all night. His footsteps on the marble floor sounded impossibly loud. He stood for a moment, letting his eyes adjust, feeling the building's attention focus on him. The elevator doors gleamed dully across the lobby. Joseph walked toward them slowly, his heart pounding. He did not know what he would find, did not know if Thomas would truly be there or if this was some kind of trap. But he had come this far. He could not turn back now. The elevator doors stood open, and yellow light spilled from inside. Joseph stopped at the threshold and looked in. Thomas was there, standing in the center of the car, looking exactly as he had the night before. Young, pale, solid, real. He smiled sadly when he saw Joseph. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I know this is difficult. I know you have questions. Come inside. We can talk." Joseph stepped into the elevator car, and immediately the doors closed behind him with a soft pneumatic hiss. The car did not move. They stood facing each other in the enclosed space, and Joseph felt the weight of 20 years pressing down on him. "Tell me," Joseph said, his voice rough. "Tell me the truth about Anna. Was she the one who killed you?" Thomas looked down at his hands. "That is the question everyone wants answered. The police, you, even Pavel, everyone needs someone to blame. But the truth is more complicated than blame. The truth is about choices and consequences and the way small compromises lead to terrible acts." Joseph felt his patience fraying. "Stop speaking in riddles. Just tell me. Did my wife murder you or not?" Thomas looked up, and his eyes held infinite sadness. "Yes," he said softly. "Anna pushed me off that roof. But Joseph, you need to understand why. You need to understand what led to that moment." Joseph felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the elevator wall for support. Even though he had been preparing himself for this answer, hearing it spoken aloud was devastating. The woman he had loved, the woman he had mourned for 12 years, was a murderer. "How?" he asked. "How did it happen? Tell me everything." Thomas took a breath, though Joseph realized he did not actually need to breathe, that it was simply a human gesture carried over from life. "It started 2 years before I died," Thomas began. Anna was Victor Cerny's assistant. She was loyal and efficient, and he trusted her completely. When he began embezzling money from client accounts, he needed someone to help him process the false transactions, someone who could manipulate the records without raising suspicion. He chose Anna. He offered her money, a lot of money, and she accepted. At first, it seemed like a victimless crime, just numbers moving between accounts. No one was getting hurt, or so she told herself. "But then I started investigating," Thomas continued. "I began noticing the discrepancies. I started asking questions. Anna tried to warn me off, tried to suggest I was making mistakes in my calculations. But I would not stop. I knew something was wrong. I kept digging, and finally I had enough evidence to prove what was happening. I told Anna I was going to the police. I gave her 1 day to confess to Victor and turn herself in. Or I would do it for her. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was giving her a chance to redeem herself." Joseph closed his eyes, seeing where this was going. "And she told Victor instead." "Yes," Thomas said. "She told Victor that I had evidence and was going to the police. Victor panicked. He knew that if the embezzlement was exposed, he would lose everything: his career, his reputation, his freedom. So he told Anna she had to fix it. He told her to eliminate the threat. And Anna, terrified of going to prison, terrified of losing everything she had built, agreed. She called me that evening and said she needed to talk, that she wanted to explain her side of things before I went to the police. She asked me to meet her on the roof where we could speak privately. I trusted her. I thought she was going to confess. So I went. Pavel had unlocked the door for her earlier, as part of the plan. And when I stepped out onto that roof, Anna was waiting. Joseph felt tears on his face but did not wipe them away. "What happened then?" he asked. Thomas's voice was gentle, almost compassionate. We talked for a few minutes. She tried to convince me not to go to the police. She offered me money to stay quiet. When I refused, she begged me to think about what would happen to her, to Victor, to everyone involved. I told her I was sorry, but I had to do what was right. And then she became angry. She said I was ruining lives over nothing, that I was self-righteous and cruel. We argued, and then in a moment of rage and fear and desperation, she pushed me. I do not think she planned it. I think it was impulse. But it does not matter. The result was the same. I fell. I died. And Anna had to live with what she had done. Joseph slid down the elevator wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. All these years he had mourned Anna, had treasured her memory, had believed she was a good person who had loved him. And all along she had been carrying this terrible secret. She had killed a man, and then come home to Joseph and pretended everything was normal. How had she done it? How had she lived with herself? Thomas knelt down beside him. "Joseph, there is more you need to know." After she pushed me, Anna was destroyed by guilt. She went home that night and broke down. She told you she was sick, that she had the flu. do you remember? You took care of her for 3 days while she lay in bed, unable to function. But it was not the flu. It was guilt and horror at what she had done. Joseph did remember. It had been about a week after Thomas's death. Anna had come home pale and shaking, had gone straight to bed, and stayed there for days. He had brought her soup and tea, and sat with her, worried. She had clung to him and cried, but would not explain why. He had thought it was just stress from work, maybe grief over the suicide that had happened in her building. He had never suspected the truth. Thomas continued speaking, his voice soft. After that, Anna changed. She withdrew from Victor Kearney. She refused to process any more false transactions. She told him she was done, that she could not live with what they had done. Victor was furious, but he could not risk doing anything to her because she knew everything. So he let her go, and she quit her job a month later. She tried to rebuild her life. She tried to be a better person. But the guilt never left her. Did she ever think about confessing? Joseph asked. Did she ever think about turning herself in? Thomas nodded. Many times. But she was afraid. Afraid of prison. Afraid of losing you. She knew that if the truth came out, you would leave her. You would hate her. So she kept silent, and the guilt ate at her from the inside. Joseph looked up at Thomas. Is that why she got sick? Is that why the cancer came? Thomas shook his head gently. I do not know. Maybe. Maybe guilt and stress weakened her body over the years. Or maybe it was just random chance. Disease does not always have a moral cause. But I do know that when she was dying, she thought of me. She wanted to confess, but she could not bear to hurt you. So she died with the secret still locked inside her. Joseph felt anger rising through his grief. If she felt so guilty, why did she not try to make it right? Why did she not find a way to tell the truth, to give you justice? Thomas sat back on his heels. Because people are weak, Joseph. Because when we are faced with the choice between doing what is right and protecting ourselves, most of us choose self-preservation. Anna was not evil. She was just human, flawed and frightened, and trying to swim in a world that does not forgive mistakes. I was angry at her for a long time. 20 years of anger and pain and longing for justice. But being trapped here, in this place between life and death, it has given me time to understand. To see that holding on to anger does not bring peace. Only letting go can do that. Joseph wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. So what now? What happens now that I know the truth? Thomas stood and offered Joseph his hand. Joseph took it, surprised by how solid and warm it felt, and let Thomas pull him to his feet. Now you have a choice, Thomas said. You can tell the police everything I have told you. You can expose Anna's role in my death. Her reputation will be destroyed. People will remember her as a murderer. Or you can let her rest in peace. Victor Turney and Pavel Dvorak will still face justice for their roles in the embezzlement and cover-up. But Anna's name can stay out of it. She is already dead. Punishing her memory will not bring me back. Joseph stared at him. You would let me do that? You would let me protect her, even after what she did to you? Thomas smiled. I have had 20 years to think about forgiveness, Joseph. 20 years to understand that revenge does not heal wounds. Anna paid for what she did. She paid with years of guilt and a painful death. That is enough. What I want now is not vengeance. What I want is for you to be free. Free from guilt. Free from the burden of secrets. Free to live whatever years you have left without being crushed by the weight of the past. And I want to be free too. Free to move on from this place. Free to rest. Joseph felt something breaking open inside him, some wall he had built around his heart to protect himself from pain. Tears came freely now, not just for Anna or for Thomas, but for all the wasted years, all the suffering that had come from one terrible choice made in a moment of fear. "How do I let you go?" Joseph asked. "How do I help you be free?" Thomas placed his hand on Joseph's shoulder. "You already have, by coming here, by listening, by understanding. The building held me here because the truth was buried, because justice was denied. But now the truth is known. Now the police are investigating. Now the guilty will face consequences. My death will no longer be forgotten or misunderstood. That is enough. That is what I needed." As Thomas spoke, Joseph noticed the elevator car beginning to change. The yellow light grew brighter, warmer, less artificial. The walls seemed to fade, becoming translucent. Through them, Joseph could see not the lobby of the Mrazek building, but something else, somewhere else. A place of light and peace that hurt to look at directly. Thomas was changing too, becoming more luminous, less solid. His features were softening, his edges blurring. "It is time," Thomas said quietly. "Time for me to go. Time for both of us to move forward." "Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for caring enough to seek the truth, even when it was painful." Joseph wanted to say something profound, something that would honor this moment and this man who had suffered so much. But all that came out was, "I am sorry. I am sorry I did not do more 20 years ago. I am sorry it took so long." Thomas shook his head. "You did what you could. You were a good man then, and you are a good man now. Live well, Joseph. Live fully. Do not waste the years you have left mourning the past. Anna would want that. I want that." The light grew brighter until Joseph had to close his eyes against it. He felt a warmth wash over him, gentle and comforting, like sunlight after a long winter. When he opened his eyes again, he was standing in the lobby of the Mrazek building. The elevator doors were closed. The car was dark and silent. Thomas was gone. Joseph stood alone in the lobby for a long time, listening to the silence. The building felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from its foundations. The oppressive atmosphere that had haunted these halls for 20 years was gone. What remained was just an old structure, tired and worn, but no longer malevolent. Just concrete and steel and glass, nothing more. Joseph walked slowly to the elevator and pressed his hand against the cold metal doors. "Goodbye, Thomas," he whispered. "Rest well." Then he turned and left the building, locking the doors behind him for what he somehow knew would be the last time. He returned to the hotel where Peter was, waiting, pacing the room with worry etched on his face. When Joseph entered, Peter rushed to him. "Thank God. I was about to call the police. What happened? Are you all right?" Joseph sat heavily on the bed. "I am all right. I got the answers I needed." Peter sat beside him. "And? What did you learn?" Joseph took a deep breath and made his decision. "The person I spoke with confirmed that Anna was involved in the embezzlement," he said carefully. "She worked for Victor Kearney and helped him hide the stolen money, but she was not directly responsible for Thomas's death. That was Pavel Dvorak and Victor Kearney. They orchestrated the murder and used Anna's access to help cover it up. She felt terrible guilt about her involvement, which is why she quit her job and withdrew from everything afterward. But she did not push Thomas off that roof. It was a lie, or at least a partial lie. But it was the lie Joseph had chosen to tell. The lie that would protect Anna's memory, while still allowing justice to be served for the real architects of the crime. Petr studied his face for a long moment, and Joseph wondered if his brother could see the deception. But finally Petr nodded. "Then we tell the police that tomorrow. We clarify Anna's role as an accessory, but make clear she was not the murderer. The focus stays on Cerny and Dvorak." Joseph felt relief wash over him. "Yes. That is what we do." Petr squeezed his shoulder. "Get some sleep, brother. Tomorrow we finish this properly." The next morning they returned to the police station and met again with Detective Mali. Joseph provided additional details about Pavel's confession, carefully shaping the narrative to match the story he had told Petr. The detective listened carefully, made notes, and asked pointed questions. Joseph answered them all, and if the detective suspected he was holding something back, he did not say so. After an hour, Detective Mali sat back. "This is enough to move forward with arrests. We will pick up Pavel Dvorak today and bring Viktor Cerny in for questioning. The embezzlement charges are solid. The murder will be harder to prove after 20 years, but with Dvorak's confession and the evidence you provided, we have a strong case. Thank you for your cooperation." Over the following weeks, Joseph watched as the case unfolded in the newspapers and on television. Pavel Dvorak was arrested at his home in Brno and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice. He confessed fully, trying to negotiate a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against Victor Kearney. Victor Kearney was forced to resign from Parliament amid the scandal. He denied everything at first, but as the evidence mounted, his denials became less convincing. The story became a sensation, a tale of corruption and murder hidden for 2 decades finally brought to light. Anna's name was mentioned in the coverage, but only as a minor figure, an assistant who had been caught up in her employer's crimes. The full truth of her role remained hidden, known only to Joseph and to Thomas, who was finally at rest. Joseph resigned from his position at the Mrazek building. He could not return there, not after everything that had happened. The investment company in Prague accepted his resignation without question and hired someone else to take his place. Joseph heard later that the building was scheduled for demolition, that developers planned to tear it down and build something new on the site. He felt a strange sadness at the news, but also a sense of rightness. The building had served its purpose. It had held on to the truth until someone was ready to hear it. Now it could be released, just as Thomas had been released. Joseph moved to Germany to live near Petr and his family. His brother found him a small apartment and helped him settle in. At first, Joseph struggled with the change, with being in a new place among new people, but gradually he began to adjust. He took walks in the mornings. He learned some German. He spent time with his niece and nephew, children he barely knew but who welcomed him warmly. And slowly, day by day, he began to heal. The grief over Anna did not disappear, but it changed, becoming something he could carry without being crushed by its weight. He learned to hold both truths in his heart, that Anna had loved him, and that Anna had done terrible things. People were complicated, capable of both great love and great harm. Accepting that complexity was part of accepting life itself. One afternoon, 6 months after leaving Brno, Joseph received a letter from Detective Marley. Victor Kearney had been convicted of embezzlement and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Pavel Dvorak, in exchange for his testimony, received a reduced sentence of 12 years. Justice, such as it was, had been served. Joseph folded the letter and put it away. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of completion. The story that had haunted him for 20 years was finally finished. Thomas Svoboda could rest, Anna could rest, and Joseph, after so many years of merely existing, could finally live. He began volunteering at a local community center, helping elderly residents with small repairs and odd jobs. It felt good to be useful again, to help people without the weight of secrets and lies pressing down on him. He made friends slowly, cautiously, but he made them. And sometimes, late at night when he could not sleep, he would think about that elevator, about Thomas standing in the yellow light, about the moment of forgiveness that had freed them both. He had learned that carrying the truth alone would have destroyed him, just as it had destroyed Anna. But sharing the burden, accepting help, allowing others to know his pain, that had saved him. Thomas had given him that gift in their final conversation, the gift of understanding that forgiveness was not weakness, but strength, that letting go was not forgetting, but transcending. On the Halma anniversary of Thomas's death, Joseph lit a candle in his apartment and sat, quietly, remembering. He thought about the young accountant who had died for doing the right thing. He thought about Anna, who had made a terrible choice and paid for it with years of suffering. He thought about himself, an old man who had been given one last chance to matter, to make a difference, to seek truth even when it was painful. And he thought about the Mrazek building, now gone, torn down and cleared away, its dark history erased as if it had never been. But Joseph knew, Joseph remembered, and that was enough.